Hey guys, so in this video, I'll be covering one of the most important topics of Figma, which is auto layout. Auto layout is such a superpower in Figma, and I think like XD has it too by now. I think like Sketch is probably planning for it. I don't know where it is, but this is perhaps one of the most underrated features. Now that we have it, I think we don't really appreciate it that much, or perhaps we do, I don't know. But this is just a superpower that you have to know about. So, what is auto layout? So if I just have to give you an example of the way that we used to work before, now imagine we had a button and this is the button and we have a container around it. I'm just going to give it a background, let's say a blue background, and I'm going to give this text a white background. So I can obviously horizontally align, vertically align it centered and horizontally as well by pressing the Option H and the Option V key. Now, as you can see, this text is automatically like text is manually centered. But let's say if I actually increased the text or like added some type text to it or like introduced any other text, like you can see that the box doesn't necessarily follow the text. Now previously I used to actually resize these elements to conform to the content that's inside. But with auto layout, that you don't really have to do that. I can just press Shift A to convert any frame or wrap any element into an auto layout element. So let's say if it already is in a frame, it's going to make the frame that you have selected an auto layout by pressing Shift A or pressing the button plus here. And obviously, if you don't have a frame and if you just have like the text selected, let's just go here and let me just select the text. And if I press Shift A, it's automatically going to wrap it into a container, and it's going to give it an auto layout. As you can see, we can see the auto layout properties here. So let me just give it a background again, and let me just explain some of the properties that you see in the auto layout here. So the first property is how do the elements inside of this container span. So for example, do they span horizontally or do they span vertically? You can also see that quickly by the reflection here. If there are two columns here, then that means that the auto layout is spanning horizontally. If it's like, for example, if I change it to vertically, as you can see, it converts itself into rows. So I'm just going to rename this to a button by using the Command R key. One other thing, obviously, let's say if I were to add some icon to it. So let's just go ahead and say home. So we have the home icon here, and I can move these elements around by using the arrow keys. So since this is horizontally positioned, like these elements are horizontally positioned besides each other, I can use the left arrow key to actually move the home key to the left, and I can use the right arrow key to obviously move it back to the right. So you can easily organize where these elements sit in the auto layout within the auto layout container. So what other properties do you have? So this first property is actually the spacing between the elements within the container. So if I wanted to make it larger, I can say 24, and as you can see, the spacing here increases. If I wanted to make it smaller, I can say 8, and the spacing decreases. This attribute is actually the padding around the elements. So this is the padding of the container. So if I, let's say, wanted to change the padding to something really large, I can say 32, and as you can see, the spacing increased. This basically is a shorthand for all of the values here. So if I say 32, it's going to apply the padding at the top, the right, the bottom, the left to 32. If I say 16 minus 32, it's going to change the top and the bottom to be 16 and the left and the right to be 32. So that's really powerful. Again, if you want to have the same padding here, you can just give that one value. If you want to have the same padding at the top and the bottom and the same padding on the left and the right, you can basically just use the value of the top and the bottom, add a comma, and then specify the value for the left and the right padding. And once you do that, as you can see, that works. Some other things that you want to know about is these are the alignments. So as you can see, the home button, the home icon and the button text aren't really aligned. So I can align them by pressing, by obviously aligning it to the center. So I can just move it to the center. And as you can see, it's now centered aligned. So as you can see, there are some other properties. I'm just going to change this. I'm going to create a card for you to show you some of the other alignment items as well. I'm going to make a box in here. I'm going to give it a background of a red, and I'm going to convert this particular container into an auto layout. So as you can see, I've converted into an auto layout. It starts automatically hugging the container, hugging the elements that sit in it starts hugging the element that sit inside of the container. So by default, it's already hugging it. But since we have some padding applied, so it's not touching the edge. But let's say if I were to make the padding 0, you can see it touches the edges. But let's just make it 24. And one thing that I do want to point out is, let's say if as you can see, like this is the hug content, this is the constraints and the resizing options that are applied to the container, the auto layout container. If I wanted to change that, I wanted to make it fixed width, I can just basically resize it, or I can go here and I can choose fixed and it's going to make it fixed. I'm just going to automatically resize this container to actually make it much larger, just to demonstrate the one thing that I'm talking about. I'm going to add another ball here and I'm going to make it yellow. So now, obviously, this is the spacing in between the balls. These balls are positioned horizontally, and if I wanted to position them vertically, I can basically just change that here. Now, as you can see, the balls are positioned on the top left. If you want to position them on the top right, you can do that. If you want to position them at the bottom right, you can do that. Bottom center, bottom left, center center, center left, so on and so forth. You can change this position, this alignment, according to whatever it is that you want. Now I'm going to create another card here. Inside, I'm going to say, hey, let's just change this font to something like this. And I'm going to say this is the card title. This is the card title. And I'm going to show you how to actually create responsive components with responsive elements with auto layout. Now I want this card to span vertically, so I'm going to say this is the card title. I'm going to say this is a really long description of the card that spans into multiple lines. As you can see, this text is obviously exceeding the container width, but that's fine for now, and we'll definitely get to that later. Now I'm going to give another text. I'm going to say button text, and I'm going to apply Shift A to actually make this button an auto layout as well. So you can obviously have multiple auto layouts within auto layouts. So, and then I'm going to give this a green background. I'm going to make the text here white. So here you go. And I'm going to just make it bold. So as you can see, we have the button here. I'm just going to give it a border radius. I'm going to give it a padding 12 and then comma 24. So as you can see, we have this particular card. I'm also going to say, hey, this card actually has 2 lines of description, and I'm going to say that this card has a fixed width. So obviously it's going to be this particular width, but it's going to have a variable height. So the height is going to be hug content, and it's going to depend on the content that's inside. So for example, if I do that, as you can see, the card or the container positions itself based on the elements that are inside of it. I can do the same by saying hug contents here, and the same happens here as well. But let's say if I wanted to have this particular width and I wanted the text to wrap into multiple lines if it doesn't have a lot of space, what I can do here, instead of, let's say, saying hug content, which is just basically saying that I don't want you to specify a width for me. My width is going to be defined by the content that sits inside of me. And obviously the text is really long, so it's just going really far. But let's say if I wanted to change that to fill container, once you do that and you change that to fill container, sorry, not this. Once you change that to fill container, the text and the content inside is automatically going to start respecting the width of the container. If the width is smaller, it's going to span into multiple lines. If the width is larger, obviously it's going to be in a single line. Similarly, I can go to the button. If I wanted the button to take full width, I can basically go here and I can say fill container, and it's going to go and apply, and it's just going to take the amount of space that's available in the card. There are some other shortcuts to actually apply that fill and change those things. So if you want to apply a fill container, you can press this arrow here, and it's going to apply fill. If you want to make it hug content, you can press this arrow on the left. So that's how you do it. And then similarly, if you want to do that with the height as well, you can do that as well. So I'm just gonna for now just gonna make it hug content the height. So as you can see, the button works really well. If I actually make it fill container, you can see the button text isn't centered, but that's because this auto layout is actually positioning the button text on the top left. But I want to say that the button text should always be centered, both horizontally centered and then vertically centered. So now, as you can see, we have a responsive card component. This card title obviously does not have the fill container property applied to it, but once it does, it's also going to respect the card width. And now it works really fine and dandy. It looks really good. This is how you create a responsive auto layout component, and it's just so powerful. One minor thing that I want to explain to you guys is, let's say if you wanted to position, let's say if I have a ball here and if I have another ball here, and I'm just going to remove all of this and just going to make these balls sit side by side. I'm going to give this card a specific width. Now you have this ball here. I'm going to change this ball to red. I'm going to change this particular ball to green. If I wanted to have one ball on the left edge and one ball on the right edge, I can basically just go in this alignment and resizing box, and I can just basically say, this is currently, these things are packed, like the content inside is really packed, but I want to say I want to have space in between the content. So once I do that, one thing is going to sit on the further edge of the screen, the other, or the container, the other thing is going to sit at the other edge of the container. And you can do that if the content is actually vertically aligned as well. So if I, let's say, position it vertically, I can expand the container. As you can see, it's going to position itself at the furthermost edges by giving the maximum amount of spacing that exists between them, considering the padding, of course. There's one other way, for example, in which you can actually, so I've manually given it a space between these elements. Once you manually give some numerals to the padding in between or the spacing in between, it actually changes the alignment to packed. But let's say if you wanted to automatically choose space between without going to this particular menu, you can just say auto, and that's going to automatically change this packed to space between. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I just want to say subscribe and hit the notification bell icon just to keep an eye out for any updates or any other videos that are going to be coming through. We're going to be building really powerful stuff here. Try practicing this auto layout and some of the features that I've mentioned about it. I think these are going to be really helpful in your UI, UX, or web design career and just making you a pro in Figma. So again, anything that you would want me to cover apart from this, specifically in auto layout, definitely do let me know. But other than that, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.